You're listening to episode number 52 of the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to respond to an email that I got. And what we're going to talk about in this episode is how to erase anxiety, depression, and PTSD using the power of your mind. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Jim Fortin, and you're about to start transforming your life from the inside out with this podcast. I'm widely considered the leader in subconscious transformation, and I've coached super achievers all around the world for over 25 years. Here, you're going to find no rah-rah motivation and no hype, because this podcast is a combination of brain science, transformational psychology, and ancient wisdom all rolled into one to take your life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting a lot more in life, to feel better, to heal, to have peace of mind, to feel powerful and alive, and to bring more abundance and prosperity into your life, then this podcast is for you, because you're going to start learning how to master your mind and evolve your consciousness. And when you do that, anything you want then becomes possible for you. I'm glad you're here. Okay, so obviously you know what this episode is about. It's about how to erase anxiety, depression, and PTSD using the power of your mind. Now, in that headline, I'm sure there are many people thinking, Jim, really? Are you serious? Can you do that? Because I know that a lot of you are dealing with anxiety of some sort, depression maybe, and I'm not talking about being in a funk. I'm talking about, for example, maybe even chemical depression. And I know that some of you are dealing with trauma and PTSD. Now, all that being said, I do want to say first that I am not a medical doctor and I am not a licensed clinical psychologist. That being said, I am also not dispensing medical advice and I'm not, dispensing, psychological advice. If you think that you need medical care or mental health care or psychological health care, then please, by all means, pursue that. What I'm going to share with you in this podcast, I'm sure that you probably know that many years ago I was a hypnotist. Now, this day and age, I still teach self-hypnosis, but I do not do clinical hypnotherapy or any of that anymore. However, many years ago, I had many people coming to me with anxiety and depression, and not so much PTSD, but I want to talk about that because I know that a lot of people suffer from PTSD. Okay, I'm going to hop around here a little bit, and really what I want to talk to you about is self-hypnosis. Now, and I'm sure there's an episode here that, I talk about self-hypnosis, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about it in different places here with the episodes. But the Stanford Institute of Mind-Brain Research, what they've discovered is one of the most effective uses of hypnosis is for pain elimination or alleviation. Harvard Medical School did some research on pain and hypnosis and all this, and what they found is that people that use hypnosis prior to surgery use 90% less anesthesia. People that actually use hypnosis prior to birthing as well, let's call it hypnobirthing, have 2/3 less complications. Harvard's also discovered that people that use self-hypnosis or hypnosis for healing heal 70% faster or more than people who do not use it. Over the years, hypnosis has been endorsed by the American Medical Association. They did revoke that endorsement because they changed the way that they endorse things. However, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Columbia, the Mayo Clinic, the National Institute of Health, the British Medical Association, the American Psychological and American Psychiatric Associations all endorse the efficacy of hypnosis. Many people also, over the years I've noticed, it's interesting how polarizing that word is. A significant part of the population is afraid of the word hypnosis and they think that they can be controlled, and that's just not true. To prove that, you've never actually heard of anyone saying, I robbed that bank, and you know what, I must have been in hypnosis when I did it. Hypnosis is completely, for the most part, you cannot hurt yourself with it. You can't get stuck in hypnosis. You've never heard of anybody that's, stuck in hypnosis and they've got to be rushed to the emergency room to get out. So it's an amazing, amazing tool that very few people know about or use. What I find mind-blowing, and I definitely don't mean this in any kind of judgmental way, it's kind of like, are you kidding me? When you look at humanity, the power of the mind is so extraordinary. Yet none of us are ever taught how to use our mind for healing and health and wellness and prosperity and anything that we want to create in life. So I'm going to hop around here just a little bit. So I talked about Stanford, and I also read one time that the ancient Egyptians also used hypnosis for surgery. That being said, and I really wish I had the documentation, it was many years ago I read, where the Columbia University did open heart surgery using only hypnosis as anesthesia. And here's the thing is that the body actually creates its own anesthesia and knows how, and especially when you direct your body to do it. One of the first people who taught me hypnosis was a business partner for many years, and she was also my NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming Trainer. Her name is Peggy Dean. And Peggy and I have been friends for a lot of years. And I remember when Peggy would go to the dentist, she would use Novocaine. I've seen her do this. She would sit back in the dental chair and she would say, give me a minute. She would go into self-hypnosis and literally numb her mouth and tell the dentist, go ahead, start working. And she had no Novocaine and no pain. But I remember, and please pay attention to this, if you're in any kind of pain, you do not need to be in pain. I remember a woman many years ago came to me when I was doing hypnotherapy, and she said, do you know how I know when I am in hypnosis? Now, I can tell because there are signs you look for in the breathing patterns and facial structure and stuff like that. But I said, no, how do you know when you're in hypnosis? And she said, easy, because I feel no pain. And I said, I didn't know you had pain. You didn't tell me that. You came for something else. And she goes, oh, yeah, I have really, really bad nerve pain. And as a matter of fact, it's so bad sometimes that when I go to the supermarket, I know where everything is, and I actually have to calculate how many steps I'm going to take based upon the level of pain that I'm in. And she said, when I'm with you and I'm in hypnosis, I have no pain whatsoever. Now, of course, I helped her and we eliminated the pain because it's very, very easy to do using the power of your mind and using hypnosis. So as I said, a lot of people are afraid of that word, but call it whatever you want to call it. Call it Afghan banana stand. I don't know. Call it Fruit Loops, or it doesn't matter what you call it. It's simply power of the mind. I remember my boss many years ago at the Hypnosis Institute. This guy was a wicked, crazy, really, really good hypnotist. When I say wicked, that's a phrase they use up in Boston, like wicked cool, wicked good, etc., up in the Northeast. But he was a wicked good hypnotist. And I remember him showing me one time where he was teaching hypnosis, and he told this guy that was in hypnosis, and by the way, you don't go under hypnosis, you go into hypnosis. It's simply a state of mind. And he told the guy's eyes were closed, and he said, I'm going to touch you on the arm, and I'm going to touch you with a hot poker. And it was literally nothing more than a Sharpie. That was it. He touched the guy, and within, I don't know, it was 45 seconds or so, a big red whelp appeared where he touched the guy. That is the power of the mind. Now, many years ago, being a hypnotherapist, I spent probably 5 years doing exclusively hypnosis and hypnotherapy. I have seen just about, everything come to me. I had this mom who sent her 18-year-old son who was bedwetting. Literally stopped one session. I've had people that have come to me smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Literally, they quit one session, no craving. I've had people that are alcoholics that have quit very, very quickly, generally a couple of sessions, 2 or 3, because there's generally some hypnotherapy to be done. They stop drinking with no cravings. My office used to be near Wall Street in New York City many years ago when I worked there back in 98, 99, 2000, 2001. I had countless people that worked on Wall Street coming to me, and they wanted hypnosis for focus, memory, and concentration and confidence because they were taking their Series 63 test and their Series 7 and all these tests they had to take and pass to be stockbrokers. So, it runs the whole gamut of what you can use it for. And let me put it this way. Somebody asked me a question yesterday, Jim, what can I use hypnosis for? Anything, and I do mean, well, there's one thing. There's one caveat. I'll get to it in a moment. In my experience, anything you want to change in your life, in your physical health, your wellness, and your thought patterns, and your behavior, anything can be changed with hypnosis. Now, I'll finish the thought that I was just mentioning when I said there is one thing before I say that. Also, I had a lot of TV stars, movie stars, and Broadway actors come to me, and especially a lot of Broadway actors. And the reason why is because they would go to an audition, and what would happen is they would take their body to the audition, and they'd leave their mind somewhere else, and they'd start freaking out. And like girls would say, well, I'm gonna audition for this part, and oh my gosh, she's taller and she's prettier, or she's well known, or this or that, and they would mess up their auditions. I once had this piano player come to me. He had to play at the Harvard Conservatory, I believe it was called. And he said, Jim, when I play in front of people, he goes, I get nervous. And now, he's playing at Harvard. And he said, when I get nervous, I play faster. Then when I play faster, I don't play pieces really well. Can you hypnotize me so that I'm calm, cool, and collected when I perform? Absolutely. Okay, the caveat that I want to share with you, what I've observed over the years, and I've always respected this, and I've never actually taken a client that's asked me for this, and people have. The only thing in my experience that cannot be changed psychologically and behaviorally is sexual orientation. Whatever your sexual orientation is, that's hardwired in the brain. You're homosexual, you're gay, you're straight, whatever, it's hardwired in the brain. And I wouldn't try to change it in someone because in my experience it's hardwired in the brain. So that being said, beyond that, anything, get that, please pay attention. Anything that you want to change in life, like I said, bedwetting and nail biting and test taking and anxiety and all that, which we'll get to in a moment, can be alleviated or remedied with self-hypnosis or by visiting a hypnotist. That being said, also, many times people will ask me, Jim, what do I look for in a hypnotist? You know, hypnosis is not, for the most part, regulated by many states because you really can't do any harm with it. I mean, it's like doing harm with power of the mind. But what I tell people is if you're going to look for a hypnotherapist, you want to find somebody that has been certified by NGH, which is the National Guild of Hypnotists. I know what their training is. I've been through it. I recommend it completely, and it's literally extraordinarily comprehensive. And anybody that's NGH certified, for the most part, they know what they're doing. And when I say for the most part, in any industry, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or, engineer, whatever, I mean, you've got people that lead the field and people that are, dragging up the caboose in the field. And the same thing with hypnotherapy. Okay, now the person in the question had asked me about anxiety. Here's the thing. Many of you suffer, and I know many of you suffer from social anxiety. Some of the most prescribed medications are social anxiety medications. Now, I don't know that this will apply to everyone, but in my experience, it has been very, very easy to wipe out anxiety in one session. And what I did, just to give you a little background here, when people would come to me, and by the way, if you've ever been, which we've all been hypnotized, when we go through our days in a state of hypnosis all day long. However, if you've ever been formally hypnotized, and this is what I tell people, that many people become hypno junkies because it feels so good. But when you're in a nice state of hypnosis, I mean, you're just in bliss. You're just in peace. That's why I say people become hypno junkies. And what I do when people come to me for anxiety, when I notice that they're really, really relaxed and in a nice, what I call trance, and a nice state of hypnosis, I will say, are you anxious right now? I am not exaggerating. I'm telling you the truth. I have never, ever had one person come to me for anxiety. I take them into hypnosis, and then they say, Jim, I have anxiety right now. So what I would do is I would say, I would ask, do you have any anxiety right now? And they would say no. And then where I would go with that, I would say, see, you're not always in a state of anxiety because your brain and your unconscious mind knows how to be anxious and it knows how to not be anxious, and you're not anxious right now. And then I would take them through a process showing them quite literally, it was a metaphor, but basically I would put a knob on their anxiety, like any kind of knob you would use on your stove or whatever, and I would have them turn the anxiety up, and I'd have to show them they can increase it, and I would have them turn the anxiety down, and then I would have them turn the anxiety off. Now again, I'm not making any medical claims. I'm just telling you my personal experiences. And if you're suffering from any kind of anxiety whatsoever, there's no need. You can't eradicate it. Okay, so I want to add there, sometimes also people confuse stress and anxiety. Stress is reaction to a known cause. Anxiety is an experience or an emotional or physical state caused by an unknown cause. I don't want to dig too deeply in here. And by the way, I'm sure I've shared somewhere in these podcasts, right after college, this was 1987. I was a complete victim of circumstances. The Texas economy had tanked. I couldn't, air quote, find a job, etc. And I ended up on the beach not living on the beach, but working on the beach and managing a store near where I grew up. And it hit me one morning. I can tell you the date. It was August the 8th, 1987. Yeah, August the 8th, 1987. I woke up and I was having an anxiety and panic attack, and I didn't know what it was. And I had what I believe, and I didn't have health insurance back then, and I couldn't afford to go to a psychologist or whatever. And there were no psychologists where I was working. I had a combination of what I would say was clinical depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. And I tell you, it was just a lovely experience and some of you probably can relate, when the anxiety attacks and clinical depression would hit. It was like, oh my gosh, here we go. This is not fun. And even if I had just eaten lunch, guess what? My lunch was going to come right back up. Some of you can relate to this as well. After I stopped having the anxiety and panic attacks, I had anxiety about having an anxiety attack again. I wasn't even having anxiety attacks, but I had an anxiety that I might have an anxiety attack. And the way that I alleviated this and completely stopped it, and it took me a while to get over the symptoms because I wasn't adept at using the power of the mind now like I was then, but I was figuring it out back then. And I'm kind of hopping around here, but the way I put this together is I noticed one time when I was really relaxed, I had no panic and I had no anxiety. And I'm like, whoa, there's got to be something here. And by the way, those of you that have had panic attacks and anxiety know that it can hit you at any moment. But in that moment, I made that correlation. And I'm like, if I know how to not have anxiety from some brain-based or unconscious level, I also know how to have it. And then, of course, not have it. And I started playing with meditation because I started meditating in college, my sophomore year. I remember back then, we had cassette tapes, and I bought a program that doesn't exist anymore. It was called Relax and the Alphanetics. And it was $88, which I didn't have in college, and so I had to make I had to make monthly payments of $11 a month to pay for it. And I started putting two and two together, and I went back to the program in my mind, and I went, dug up the cassette tapes, and I air quote healed myself from the panic and the depression and the anxiety by learning to actually meditate and to use self-hypnosis. So I'm telling you that these things that you're dealing with, if this relates, any of you can relate to this, you do not have to actually, put up with that anymore. Use the power of your mind to heal yourself. And this can work, again, for anxiety. It can work for panic attacks. It can work for depression. And it can also work for PTSD. Now, how do I know that it can work for all of these? I know it not because of what I've read or any videos or any of that. I know it because I've experienced helping people with eliminating any of these ailments. Now, PTSD, I did some research on this, and I read where the National Institute of Health said that in research they had done, they discovered that that clinical hypnosis or hypnotherapy or even self-hypnosis was effective at alleviating or eliminating PTSD. Why? Well, PTSD is simply trauma which is held in the unconscious mind. When you use hypnosis to change whatever's held in the unconscious mind, the PTSD or the anxiety or the trauma or the response to trauma goes away. This is why it's so powerful. And candidly, I have so much going on in my life that I'm very, very focused on where I'm going and what I'm doing in the podcast and my transformational programs. But I will tell you that I'm shocked at the amount or the lack of amount of awareness and vocalization about the use of hypnosis with PTSD, because when it comes to PTSD in the military, for every single person that's killed in combat, 3 come home and they kill themselves from PTSD. And I know that because that has even happened in my own family. Now, it was actually extended, and I didn't know my cousin had PTSD. His mother, I guess he's a second cousin. His mother is a cousin of mine, and we were very close, but I didn't know he had PTSD. And after a few tours in Afghanistan, I don't know how many, he was there, I think, 10, 12 years. He came home, had PTSD, couldn't get any help, and unfortunately, he ended his life. And I wish I would have known that he had PTSD because I could have definitely helped. And also, we live in a culture where people get into shame and they don't talk about it. And PTSD, whether it's from trauma in your own personal life or sexual abuse, because there are so many things that cause trauma, or combat or whatever, these are all things that people hide and they don't talk about in our culture here in the US. And if people would talk about these things, I think we could create more awareness and a lot more people could be helped. And even here in the US, sexual abuse causes trauma. And I'm going to tell every one of you, when I was a hypnotherapist, I heard just about everything. Anything people would do, I've heard. From being sexually abused to people actually having cravings to be a pedophile. I mean, all these things that I heard, and I'm going to use the word shocked because no one talks about it. I am shocked at the degree of sexual abuse of both boys and girls that exist in the United States. And then when this happens to kids, they grow up. And then what happens is they don't talk about it, and it creates literally low self-esteem, low self-worth. It creates many, many issues that happen later in life, and people actually can't trace back to the shame, humiliation, or whatever it was of the sexual abuse. I want to touch on something else here, and we'll wrap up. Is I read many years ago that back in the 50s, I believe, when the American Medical Association endorsed hypnosis, they recommended that doctors have 100 hours of training in hypnosis. And yet, even today, I think like 2% of doctors have any training. And doctors, and there's a formal word. One of my students currently is a surgeon, and he told me the word. I don't remember. It's a big formal word. And doctors can actually kill people using the power of their words. If, let's say, for example, a person goes to a doctor and they subscribe to a doctor as an authority, and the doctor says, you know what, you've got stage 4, you're not going to make it. If that person believes that, guess what? That's what the unconscious mind does. Research has also demonstrated that when people are in surgery, even though they are unconscious, their unconscious mind or their subconscious, let me say this, when they are unconscious, their subconscious mind hears everything that's being said in the operating room. And there's been actually some research done on this, where when people are, when they're under anesthesia and they're unconscious, their subconscious mind's like a tape recorder. It hears everything in the room, in the operating room. And if a doctor says something like, wow, this is a mess, this is bad, this person's going to have a long, long recovery, guess what? Those comments made in the operating room while the person is under anesthesia are registered by that person's subconscious mind. Now, how I got off on this little tangent is most doctors don't even know the power of the mind. I mean, I said earlier, this is research that people that have surgery use 90% less anesthesia and have 2/3 less complications when they have actually even one session with a competent medical hypnotist prior to surgery. Many years ago, there's a big healthcare system here in Dallas called Baylor Healthcare. The director of education many, many years ago, about 20 years ago, approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in being the on-call medical hypnotist for Baylor Healthcare System here in Dallas. So I know what I'm talking about when I tell you that you can heal yourself with the power of the mind. Little things. For example, somebody had mentioned last week their child is a type 1 diabetic. And I said, you know what? Because there was a famous hypnotist named Dave Ellman, and he only worked with doctors back in the 50s. And what he would do is teach doctors how to use what's called conversational hypnosis to get kids to imagine they had this little magical spot on their arm, and anything in that spot they wouldn't feel. And then when they got an injection, they wouldn't feel it. Why? Because they were actually given the suggestion that they wouldn't feel it. I remember when I was 8, I grew up in Texas, you may or may not know. And when I say I was barefoot one summer, I mean, I didn't grow up barefooted running around, but I was walking and I had this little bitty piece of glass in my foot, and I had to go to the doctor and have it taken out. And the doctor, who was my doctor since birth, said, Jimmy, that's what he called me. He goes, this is going to hurt when I give you an injection. And I remember he gave me a shot of Novocaine, and I screamed bloody murder. As a matter of fact, I screamed so loud that if I were a kid sitting out in the waiting room waiting for the doctor, I would have ran out the door. I mean, it's like, I don't know what's going on back there, but I don't want to be part of it. But what if the doctor had said to me, you're not going to feel a thing? But when he said this is going to hurt, and I even grabbed the side of the tables I was sitting on, he created the expectation in my mind. So what I'm telling you here is that if you ask your doctor, what do you think about hypnosis? I would do my own research as well, because most doctors don't know anything about hypnosis, the power of the mind, the power of autosuggestion, and the power of healing. when it comes to the psychological aspect of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. I was at a party many years ago and I was talking to this guy and he was telling me that he was a licensed, he was a clinical psychologist is what he was, obviously a licensed clinical psychologist. Now he didn't know I was a hypnotist and he was talking about something. And I just said, because I wanted to, candidly, you may or may not know by listening to the podcast, I'm a rebel rouser. I rattle cages. That is my job this lifetime, to rattle cages, to get people to think and get people to wake up. And I said to him, and this was calculated in my mind, I said, he was talking about some difficult case or something that was hard to air quote cure or whatever. And I said, what about hypnosis? Have you thought about using that? Now, mind you, this guy is a PhD in psychology. You know what he said to me? He said, everyone knows that crap doesn't work. And I thought, yeah, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Columbia, the Mayo Clinic, the National Institute of Health, the American Medical, British Medical, American, blah, blah, blah. American Psychological and Psychiatric Associations all say differently. Now, of course, I didn't say that. And I walked away and I'm like, this guy is responsible for assisting people to heal mentally. And he doesn't even, and is not even aware of the full range of mental tools that he has to help people. When I was doing hypnotherapy in New York back in 98, 99, as I said, in the 2000s, I had a lady come to me one time. And I've always remembered this lady, and she sat in the chair. That's what we just called it. It's the hypnotherapy chair. It's a recliner, basically, a barca lounger. And she said, Jim, she goes, I've been in therapy for 10 years, and I can tell you everything that's wrong with me. And she goes, I can tell you every diagnosis, but I don't feel any better. The reason that traditional therapy, and this may ruffle some feathers, and actually one of my coaches, a transformational coach, has a PhD, and her words, not mine. She has a PhD in clinical psychology. Her words, not mine again. She said clinical hypnotherapy. She said traditional therapy does not work. That's why she's a transformational coach now. Now, I'm not saying it does or it doesn't, because it can prove valuable in some instances. But here's something that a lot of therapists don't know, is that talk therapy is all left brain, and the pain or whatever it is, the emotional trauma, is coming from the right-hand side of the brain. So talk therapy, which is left brain analytical, the left analytical brain can get it, but the right-hand side of the brain is not getting it, and that's where all change happens. So back to the lady in my barca lounger. She said, Jim, I came to you because I can tell you everything that's wrong with me, and I don't feel any better. And then talk about pressure. She said to me, I would rather die than live the life that I'm living now. And she goes, I read that hypnosis can help us change our unconscious paradigms at an emotional level, mentally, etc. And I'm glad to say we did a couple of sessions and she had significant improvement. So my takeaway for the last part of talking to you is, if you ask your doctor, I would still do my own research, and there's plenty of stuff online. And if you ask a psychologist or somebody in the psychological field, I would also do my own research, because these people are licensed professionals and they don't know the full gamut of tools that they have available to assist their patients and clients. So I'm telling you, don't take my word for it. Do your own research and use the power of your mind to at least alleviate, but you can eliminate the anxiety and the social anxiety and the trauma and the PTSD. Again, I'm going to say to cover my butt, I am not a licensed medical doctor, nor am I a licensed clinical psychologist. I am not dispensing medical or psychological advice. If you think you need that, then please seek that out. All right. Your transformational takeaway for this episode is that you can change anything in your life, and you can affect the physical organism that you are by using self-hypnosis and the power of your mind. Okay, the next episode on Wednesday is one of my favorite topics. That episode is going to be titled, How Your Brain Sabotages Your Goals. Now, if you're like many people, you're probably thinking, what? What do you mean my brain? It's my brain that thinks of my goals. Well, there's also a part of your brain that sabotages your goals. And to discover what that part of the brain is and how to stop that, make sure that you listen to the next episode. Okay, thanks for listening to this one. Do what you can to make it a great day today. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this entire podcast. If you're the kind of person who likes to help others, then share this with your friends and family. If you found value, they will too. so please share via your social media channels. Also, if you have questions, I'm here to assist. You can email me questions to support@jimfortin.com, and I may even use your question for a future podcast episode. Also, if you want transformational content like this daily, connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram name is I am Jim Fortin. Finally, I do have a personal request. I believe that we're all here to help others and to grow and evolve ourselves. Together, you and I, let's help more people. If you would please leave a review on iTunes, and a good one by the way. I'd be grateful, and through your assistance together, we can transform more lives. Thanks for listening.